we can start talking about cottagecore horror as a genre, we need to first define what cottagecore even is. In a nutshell, cottagecore is an aesthetic that started to become popular around 2017. It's an aesthetic that romanticizes the idea of a simple life away from the stresses and responsibilities of the modern world. It upholds traditional skills as a way to find and achieve happiness, skills like sewing, gardening, baking, all while maintaining a picturesque wildflower cottage. The key word is romanticizes, because once you really start to dig into the details of what all of that entails, you'll realize that it isn't all just Instagram-worthy photos of loaves of bread and tree swings. The actual amount of work it would take to make and maintain a cottage and pantry by hand would be astronomical. Not to mention the fact that we are all stuck in a capitalist hellscape, so escaping the need to have money is another minor problem you'll have to consider. Blom by Delilah S. Dawson is a short and mesmerizing book about infatuation, sexual identity, and obsession. The book introduces us to our main character Rosemary, right as she's moved to a new town. She recently broke up with her longtime boyfriend and took a job at the local college teaching literature to get a new start. Rosemary goes to the local farmer's market every Saturday, and this is where she meets Ash. Ash is where the cottagecore comes into the story. Ash has a booth at the farmer's market and she sells everything from bread, soap, cupcakes, and candles, all handmade by her. Rosemary is instantly infatuated with Ash and extremely confused because she's never had feelings like this for another woman. Rosemary makes it a habit to stop by Ash's booth every Saturday, and soon her interest begins to turn into obsession. This is a horror book though, so things eventually escalate to a gruesome conclusion. But before that happens, this book does a wonderful job of taking us on the journey of infatuation, love, and obsession with Rosemary. It makes you feel like you're also captivated by Ash and will leave you wondering how you also ignored the major red flags along the way. I know many of you will have the initial reaction of, well, I feel like folk horror already encompasses this, and you wouldn't be wrong. Cottagecore horror is a more specific niche within folk horror. Paganism, folklore, isolation, rural settings, these are all elements of both genres, but I would say cottagecore horror has an element of coziness thrown in. But the cozy flower garden, bread baking, and knitting is camouflage for what lurks in the shadows. The horror comes from a corruption of what is supposed to be our romanticized escape from the modern world and all of our responsibilities. Slewfoot by Bram is a story about sensual American folk magic with a dash of Miyazaki Studio Ghibli-style creatures and gods. This book takes place in a 1600s Puritan colony and displays the horror of Christian patriarchy from the perspective of a recently widowed woman. Our main character is Abatha. She has always been strong-willed and had a talent for herbcraft and creating charms. She was married off to a man in the colonies to pay off her father's debt, but she was fortunate enough to have a husband who appreciated her talents and was kind to her. Shortly after the book begins, her husband dies and Abatha is left to manage the small farm they both lived on. The authority of the colony wants to pass the land off to her brother-in-law, but she manages to strike a deal temporarily to hold on to it. The caveat being she must prove that she's able to bear fruit from the land and pay off the remaining amount of money owed to own the land completely. While this is all happening, she begins to spot strange creatures and one ominous figure who's visiting her farm. Abatha is also dealing with the real-world problems of her brother-in-law undermining her so he can take the land from her. This book is a dark fantasy with a slightly sexual depiction of magic and the terror of trying to exist in a Puritan colony as a woman whom everyone suspects is a witch is truly horrific. Cottagecore really started to come into its own during the 2020 pandemic. Mass amounts of people were locked in their homes with nothing to do. Initially, everyone started by recovering from their own forms of burnout, binge watching TV, playing video games, exercising. Quarantine presented society with something we hadn't experienced in generation: time without the expectation to be productive. The pandemic was definitely horrific in many ways, but the unexpected side effect of time meant people were able to explore passions and curiosities. People started playing music, knitting, painting, growing plants, writing, and of course baking bread. But next time you're getting lost in your pastoral fantasies, remember that there is a dark side. A monster may be lying in wait, hidden among the wildflowers, waiting to tear it all down and drag you kicking and screaming back to the real world.